there is still a purpose, right? There is still a fixed idea of what we as artists should be doing. And I think for dance, quite often, it's really hard to find that purpose. We are so embroiled in what we're doing, right? We're doers. We're always doing, it's action, it's action, it's action. But I think what we have to get better at as a sector is communicating with people outside of our sectors. That's hard, right?
Welcome to the Dance Rants podcast. I'm Dylan Holly, a freelance artist and teacher with an urban dance background based in the Netherlands.
And I'm Hayden Idris, a classically trained dancer now working for the Dutch modern dance company Introdance. This podcast is a platform to create discussion about dance and to learn and gain insight from our guests. We hope you enjoy.
In this episode, we're joined by the one and only Sarah Reynolds. Sarah is an organiser for the Dancers Council in Holland, which is an organisation that aims to initiate dialogue among the dancing workforce of the Netherlands and to help improve policy that is relevant to our rights and working conditions. Sarah is an ex-dancer of NDT. She holds a bachelor's in psychology from the Open University in the UK and is now studying a master's in cultural policy. Sarah tells us about the work that they're doing at the Dancers Council. She gives us insights about the complexity of changing and forming of policy in the dance industry for the benefit of the workforce, and shares some of her stories and highlights from her own personal journey, her career, including her experiences with auditions and with being a mother in a company. Okay, so welcome to the Dance Rants podcast. We're joined today by the amazing Sarah Reynolds, a fellow Irish. Woohoo! Very pleased to have Sarah. Sarah's an ex-dancer of NDT. She worked with them for many a year. NDT 2 for, I believe, 3, and then for NDT 1, was it 14 years?
In total, I worked sort of 15 years, so it was 3 then with NDT 2, and then, 12 with NDT 1.
Okay.
Yeah.
I did my maths wrong, sorry. But yeah, nonetheless, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Sure thing.
But yeah, how are things going with the Dancers Council?
Well, yeah, good. We actually, funnily enough, had our last meeting of this year yesterday. So that was fun. And we had some new people joining us, new representatives from some companies. Yeah, it's going well. We've had a lot going on this year, obviously, like the rest of the world. A lot of issues to deal with. Also a lot of sort of processing of who we are, what we want to do, and how we want to move forward with this. And so if I explain a little bit what the Dancers Council is that a good moment?
No, I was just going to say, if you're in a midst of kind of redefining that, maybe it's nice for us to know what you guys have kind of defined yourselves as, and for the listeners as well who probably don't know too much about it yet.
Yeah, sure. Well, initially it was the idea of one of my fellow colleagues at NDT at the time, Rupert Tukey. He went to a Corso and Omscholing Dancers event way back in the day, I believe in 2015-16, and it was called The Staat van de Danser. And it was about the situation of predominantly freelance artists in dance at that time. Now, it's not great, and it continues not to be great, but it was just a wonderful get-together of people to discuss the issues that people were facing. And Rupert thought, why don't we do this also for dancers in the biz, and particularly the dancer representatives or company speakers. It depends where you are, how you call it. And those would be the dancers that are sort of sent to mediate between the dancers as a collective and the direction. They represent the dancers' interests. Mm-hmm. And just kind of streamline communication. It's also an informal role, mostly.
This is the internal communication between sort of the group and the direction? Or are you talking more as a collective in the Netherlands between the biz companies?
So we were talking first about the company representative. So that would be internally.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's what Rupert wanted to organize, that we got together from all the different companies in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
To just have, an exchange of information, knowledge, advice. So that's what we did. We met all together. It was the representatives from NDT, which at the time was myself and Rupert. Introdance was there. Jamie was there. We had representatives from the National Ballet and Scapino. Those were the 4 structurally funded companies at the time. And ODN, the Omscholing Dancers Nederland, they facilitated us. We went to their offices in Amsterdam. They ordered some food for us. We sat down, we chatted about this and that. And there are differences within the companies and how it's organized and how formal or informal it is. And the companies are, of course, very different, right? But everyone enjoyed it. It was a relief to meet people that were kind of going through the same things that you were going through, right? And this nature of mediation between a group and a boss, basically. It's unusual. It's an unusual position to be in. And I think everyone sort of at that meeting felt like, oh, this is really great. We can come and just let it go, just let it all out and let's see what we could make of it. And so we kept doing that, basically. We kept doing that, and, people would come and go and representatives would change and move on. And we realized we worried some people. When they heard we were meeting, I think a little bit. And so there was some eyebrows raised, but, we weren't throwing shade at anyone. Do you know what I mean? It was never about that, but it was more about us sort of coming together and just like speaking it out freely, knowing that everyone in that room was in a very similar position or had been in a similar position, that they could understand these unusual positions to be in sometimes. So it was very therapeutic for us. Yes. And it did raise some issues. And we also were able to identify issues across the board that everyone was experiencing. And then it got to the point where we started to try and think, okay, well, what do we do about this? Like, how do we convert our complaints or rants? How do we convert that and transform it into something constructive and positive? So it just so happened around about that time, there was talk about negotiating a new collective labor agreement. Now, this labor agreement that we're now in, by the way, we started negotiating it in 2019. And that was the year I kind of fizzled out of NDT. So I offered myself up to attend the meetings on behalf of the Dancers Council because I had kind of been pushing someone else to do it. I knew we needed someone at that table.
Yeah.
I knew that was the most important thing that we could do as the Dancers Council, was to just get a seat at that table. Even if we didn't manage to achieve anything, sitting down at the table with the NAPK and the union and the chair of those negotiations was going to be really important for us, because we would know how, first of all, how they do things. We would learn how they're talking about the issues, and we would potentially be able to bring our perspective to those talks. So that, for me, was priority number one. And I had been pushing and pushing this other guy to do it, like, you're perfect for it, it's going to be great. And he was like, no, absolutely not. Until it came to the point that I realized, God, I've been expecting someone else to do this work, so why don't I go ahead and put my money where my mouth is, So I offered myself up, and we got down to that business. We managed to book a few successes in this new CAO that we're in that started January of this year. A few not so successful issues, but something to be continued. And I think it will become a more common feature that we have that seat at the table now, hopefully. So that's good. Yeah, so that's a little bit what the Dancers Council is. And so we've been meeting then for how many years now? That was our first meeting was in 2017, and yeah, our last meeting was yesterday. So we keep meeting, I think on average every 2 months, something like that. But it is really informal, and it is based on, people's availability and stuff like that. And up until now, we've been really sort of targeting like the representatives, so the dancer representatives, and those that are in those tricky situations, that need the support, that need the group to feel part of something bigger than just their internal issues. So yeah, and I hope that we can offer, the same to other dancers too. So we'll see how that goes. That's the bigger plan. Anyway.
So am I right in thinking that you began the Dancers Council then? You and your colleague?
Began it. I mean, we organized, it was Rupert's idea with Paul, and they sent out an email, and we showed up. So yeah, there was no plan then, you know what I mean? We just literally got on the train, and we quickly realized that within the companies there's very different ways to do things. Like, for example, NDT had 2 representatives from each company, 1 and 2, and they had their short lines of communication with their direct managers. It was separate from the OR, the Workers' Council, and had little or nothing to do with the Workers' Council. For example, in Intradance, your representatives are very much connected to the OR, and I think they're even in the OR. So it's a very formalized relationship then that they have too, which is really great. The National Ballet has an Underdales Committee, which is a sort of a subcommittee of the official OR of the whole music theatre. So they're an official entity within a much bigger entity. Yeah, and then you have Scopino that doesn't have the numbers to have an official OR. So they have a very informal role. So you've got a mix of different layers of responsibility and formality, which makes it complicated. But in reality, I think the relationships are the same. Like, it's dancer to director, so it's easy to see how people are dealing with issues in specific ways,
But this group, the Dancers Council, is different than from the OR.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We're a support group.
Okay.
We're more a support group / trying to be a lobby for the working dancer, let's say.
Okay, then we need to stay in touch, because I'm actually doing the internal representation for the company, but I'm not part of the OR. So we have 2 representatives for each group, and the other representative for my group is part of the OR.
Okay. Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so Giuseppe and I are the representatives for our group.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, funny, yeah? It's all like everyone's organization is shaped in different ways for the different needs, and yeah, that's really interesting. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So technically you could join our dancer council.
Yeah, no, I want to join.
Yeah, dude, come on.
I want to join too.
All right, Dylan, I'm going to tell you when you can join. I am planning to hold a dancers council meeting for freelancers and people from the smaller groups in the new year. So that would be cool if you would join that one.
Yeah, no, happily, very happily.
Cool.
Yeah, because you started working with freelancers or supporting freelancers, or in the last.
Not yet. That's my goal. That's my goal.
Okay, great. Yeah, because you guys are kind of like the closest thing the Netherlands has to a union for dancers. I know it's still a ways away, but it's I don't know, it's both great that you're doing this, but also very sad that there just isn't a union for dancers. Like,
And the funny thing is there is.
oh, there is.
Oh, there is.
Not specifically for dancers.
Okay, for performing arts.
Yes. And
There's-
not the performing arts either, for the arts and cultural sector.
Oh,
Okay, yeah.
And that is great. And so I was on the side of the Kunstebond, it's called the Kunstebond, when we were doing these collective labor negotiations. And they have the formal relationship with the employers organization. So they are charged with negotiating this labor agreement on behalf of employees and workers. Yeah. Unfortunately, because their base is so broad, quite often it's very difficult for them to hear about the issues that employees or workers are coming in contact with. So therefore, they were very happy to have me as a dancer representing the Dancers Council and hopefully all dancers' wishes. And they also had a member of the actors organization. They are, the actors are far more organized than we are. So the actors already have their lobby group set up. It's called ACT, Belangenvereniging. The translation is really nice. It's Belangen are your wants, your wishes, your desires, an organization, basically. They're basically a lobby group. I see them as a lobby group with a bit more, with a bonus. They have sort of casting calls, and they set up the profiles of their actors, so they have a whole bunch of activities and opportunities for their members. And I could imagine, and I would hope to see that the Dancers Council sort of fleshes out to become something like that, but for dancers. So that's my goal. But we have to see how we make that happen, and if that is the goal of everyone, of course, too. So yeah. So the idea behind having freelancers is like, okay, we could do a similar meeting that we have for company representatives right now, but for freelancers, and just create a safe space where everyone can come and just sign in and hear people's stories and hear and speak, and literally have a place to just speak. It's really interesting that people are so afraid to talk right now.
That would be great, because it is true that dancers just don't really talk about things enough. It was one of the reasons that me and Hayden enjoyed doing this and inviting people on, is to just circulate conversation about experiences, potential problems or wishes for the future. So it is nice that you guys are working on creating a safe space for this to happen in person. Well, if Corona allows for it to happen in person.
Maybe space on Zoom or Skype or whatever your choice of call platform is.
Yeah.
Also, that there's some sort of like formal representation for the dancers as a workforce. I think it's crazy. I mean, you said that there was officially this dance or the Union for the Arts that were representing us in these laboring agreement meetings, but it's crazy that there wasn't actual representation from the workforce of dancers before 2019.
Yeah, that is quite something. I think there's also, and I don't know if you guys feel this too, but I think Corona has brought with it a great reckoning that we were all working way too much before Corona, and it was very hard then to see the wood from the trees. When you're sort of in your bubble, not a Corona bubble, but when you're in your silo of like, I'm going to work, I'm going to do my thing, there's no time. There's no time to stick your head up and go like, let's figure out how this works, or let's see how I can improve this. There's just not. You're just on that train of going to work, training, rehearse, 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 show, get on a bus, go home, sleep, get up. It's just just a machine, right? Especially in the biz, of course, when there's these huge numbers of shows and productions that have to happen, right? And then freelancers also like looking for work, looking there. You've got like to open up your doors and have a network of, I don't know, as many people as you can manage and hope for the best, right? There's little leeway in finding support systems, right? I know I didn't have the bandwidth to deal with that. So yeah, there is a huge need. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the great thing about the Dancers Council as well, I think, is then you're having this dialogue between dancers that are in different environments, and they can see then how things are working in a different place and potentially bring that to their own workplace.
Yeah, to just create like standards of practice, just kind of, working conditions and everything, because I think that's not really something that is talked about enough when you're in education. You're just being taught to break your boundaries and to like go as far as you can. And if you're injured, it's just like, okay, how can you work around it rather than like, how can you rest it? And yeah, I don't know. We live in such a weird way when you look at modern society, when there's so much rules and practice and conduct for like everything. And then dance is still this kind of just wild area that just nothing's really monitored in.
Yes. And the thing is, there are those rules there that are in place to safeguard everyone. But I think quite often, and not always, definitely not always, but sometimes, because we are in our bubbles of dance and focus and top sport level kind of concentration, we don't realize that if we just turned over that page and read that one sentence, that we would find out that there is a rule that protects that. And the next step is also then very important, which is saying, oh, hey, actually, look at this rule here. That means we can't do that, right? So that's a little bit my mission. Also because I was involved in this CAO. I also haven't read it all from start to finish, but I've read a good deal of it. And I've read the real dancers specific rules numerous times. So I know those. And I know that I can share that information with the people that need it when they need it. Because of course you forget, it's as well as the CAO, we have to also point out, as well as the CAO, which is the minimum that companies and employers that fall underneath the NMPK have to follow. There's also internal rules. So you have rules also within your company or your organization that could be the same or better, more beneficial, hopefully. Yeah, they cannot be less. They can be the same or better. So quite often people have like too heavy legal text to look at and go, oh God, I'll just leave it. It'll be fine just this once, right? So it is tricky. And yeah, I kind of see it as my mission to help people recognize, oh, this means that in this place and time, which is not always easy, right? Because there's a lot of nuance in what we do. I think dancers in general were very empathetic, right? We feel with the other. Yeah, you move with the other, and that sometimes means that we don't see that maybe we're letting things slide to our detriment.
Yeah, I think our empathy for others is extremely strong, but our self-care is quite questionable sometimes. It's something we keep kind of addressing in our year one of the dance therapy masters, is really that like you need to build your boundaries, especially for like people who've like trained to be professional dancers. We have terrible boundaries, and
Yeah.
so this is just something we keep talking about, and like that it is standard practice for there to be a physical therapist or a physio on site in a lot of companies, but there isn't necessarily standard practice for someone to be taking mental care for people's mental health.
Yeah.
Because some processes can be very triggering for people. It can like artistic, we give ourselves to the art, but we're still human. We still go through things, and more care can potentially be taken for that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. I 100% agree. I think it's interesting, and you brought up sort of the education side of things, because I remember in my training in London, in Central School of Ballet, we had a therapist, a psychologist she was, and she was working with the Royal Ballet as well, and she came in every once in a while, and it was all about this sort of it was cognitive behavioral therapy. So you think of your brain as a computer, and you only put the inputs in that the computer needs to compute to make this happen, right? So you think of it sort of very logically and rationally, and that's great, right? That's kind of performance related therapy. Super, super helpful, I think, or can be. But then there's also the other side, like you said, like boundaries and all of those things that, yeah, we're trained to break down. I think it's really hard, right? Because at the same time, I also know towards sort of, I want to say, the peak to the end of my career, I remember thinking to myself, I made a kind of a choice. I remember really actively making a choice of like, do you know what, this season, I'm going to try and say yes. I'm going to try and say yes to things that maybe I would have said no to, and like not not unwanted behavior, don't get me wrong, but just, when you're in a studio situation with a choreographer and you're trying things and you're offering things, you know, when someone suggests, oh, try and do it like this, I had felt up until that point in my career, I was like, oh, I can't do it that way because I just, I would make up some reason that it wasn't going to work for me. Fine. And then this one year, I was like, why don't I just say yes? Why don't I just say yes and see if it works out? And if it doesn't, fine, grand. I've tried it. And I think it accelerated my personal development, if that's a horrible word to use, but it accelerated my I don't know what it was. I felt like I grew from that. Now, I think you do pay for it then eventually too. But I remember making that active choice and thinking, yeah, this might work or it might not. So I do understand this sort of mentality that we're trained to push beyond. I think pushing is wrong. I think that's horrible. But I think making conscious decisions and being also given space to change those decisions is really important. If we could put the onus back on the dancer themselves to find a flexibility there too, mentally, I think you can protect people better. But it has to be so very conscious. And of course, that's another layer of complexity to add on to your technique and your stamina and your strength and all of the things that a dancer needs to do and be. So, yeah, I'm so glad I don't have to do that again. I would hate to be a young aspiring dancer right now. I think they face so many battles as well as Corona. So whatever they need to do to make it work for them is key, I think.
Do you think the battles that young dancers are facing nowadays are vastly different to what you went through as a young dancer, or maybe you can just see it more clearly now that you're on the other side?
That's a really good question. I think the answer is probably a bit of both. Because nowadays you don't even get to go and take company class to see and experience a company, to see if you fit in, for them to see if you fit in. You have to send in a tape. You have to send in, not a tape, showing my age, but you have to send in a YouTube video with a bit of bar, center, a contemporary solo, and ballet solo. on YouTube, yeah, or whatever, password protected. I don't know. Gosh, that's hard. I think. First of all, it means then people with more formal trainings have a huge advantage if that formal training institution has a connection with the company or not. I was still, God, really showing my age. So I was auditioning from school, and you had to send your CV by post with the pictures, and then you had to go to the audition. You literally had, so I traveled all around Europe. Yeah, just Europe, really, looking for a job. And it meant I got to see all these different companies from the inside first, and then left really quickly, right? As you do in an audition. But it meant that I had a lot of practical experience of being in a company setting before I got in a company. So it was just a little bit more of that kind of crafted relationship already before you started working. And nowadays people are sending in their videos, from halfway around the world. And if they're lucky enough to get chosen, they arrive from outer space and they just plop down and it's like, go, So I think that's really hard. And they're the lucky ones, right? They're the lucky
Mm.
ones that got those few jobs, right? Because also numbers of contracts have just been slashed in the
Yeah.
year. I think there's a lot more opportunity, however, for people to self-produce. And that's really interesting. And that's maybe more in your neck of the woods, Dylan, that people post their work online and garner a following online and get to places where they suddenly get commissioned to make work for dance companies, theater companies, commercial companies. So I think there's opportunities and pitfalls. But yeah, it just means people have to be so much more diverse.
Mm.
Yeah.
People thrive on, right? Some people love that diversity and some people don't.
Yeah, it is a weird time to be a dancer, I think, like regardless of corona or not, because funding is just get has been getting cut and cut and cut for like the last decade. Like they never really rebuilt after the big crash in like 2007 or whatever. And then you just have whatever amount of money being like there is more diversity in what's being done, but it's just like the lump of money is just being shared a bit differently. But the thing is there's more and more people coming in, or the world is getting smaller because travel's easier and because of online and everything, that you are competing with more people. It's like I went to the audition in Malmo last year and there was 11,000 applications. Sorry, 1100, 1100. Sorry, 1100,
Oh,
1100, 1100,
Still
1000,
a lot, but yeah.
1100 applications for two contracts.
Yeah.
So like one was a year contract, one was a half year contract. They invited 100 people. So it's, and like that, like you don't go and see the company. You come in for like a day that the company's not on, and that you do your audition and you leave. And it's so impersonal because there's so many people, but I guess there's always those kind of things.
Yeah, there was. I mean, I did the cattle call of NDT2, which is kind of like a ritual a lot of people go through, and it is a situation where you go in and there's going to be about 700 people.
Ooh.
And it's a day that you just have to bear with,
Mm.
get through. Hopefully you get through. So yeah, the audition thing that'll probably stay the same, although not this year,
Yeah.
obviously.
It's more the freelance scene that is kind of surprising, I guess, just it's becoming much more closed.
Yeah.
Because the funding is less, so people are holding on to the people they already know. So it's becoming a harder thing to break through unless you are, like you said, self-producing. It becomes this weird thing of like you need to be making your own work to be seen, to be getting other people's work. And it's just the bar isn't a high or lower. It's just like, where is it? What do I need to do? What do I need to be good at? And when you're not finding work, you're suddenly being encouraged to go and create a solo and find work that way. And it's just like, it's not what I trained to do, but if I have to, like,
Yeah. And you see it also, yeah, you're right. It is very difficult in the freelance scene right now. And it has been for years. But I think what you're seeing now also, especially in the Netherlands, is sort of a shift from the funding going to sort of the more established, smaller groups to individual artists, you know. So yeah, that is hard. I think that's hard for a lot of people. And at the same time, I think there's opportunity there. It's not very clear which way it's going. The funding, this, you know, the Raad van Cultuur, the Arts Council of the Netherlands, gave their advice, and it was, you know, super controversial. Again, of course, they're always controversial. Like each advice every 4 years is so controversial again, because they're trying to look at the spread of culture in the Netherlands, that it's not centered in the Randstad, which is Amsterdam, Rotterdam, and The Hague, that sort of triangle of the densely populated area of the Netherlands, and they're trying to spread it out more, which is great. It makes sense, but it makes things difficult for people because, of course, you're also living where the work is. And if where the work is changes, well, then, you know, okay, what do we do now?
Yeah, I just kind of feel like we're running around inside of this pen that's getting smaller and smaller, or like we're being pushed around. And I think that's the benefit or the power in there becoming like a union, or like specifically just for dancers. So what the Dancers Council, I know it's not, you don't have governmental, like a governmental voice yet. But my friends are telling me there was this thing. Have you heard about this warplane in the Netherlands? That in the last like whatever amount of years, like 10 or 15 years, the Netherlands spent like a few hundred million making this
Yes.
plane
Yes.
for war, and it never flew.
Yes.
Like it never flew, and then they spent I think 500,000 on throwing a celebration for the ship, and I think like something happened where like because it hadn't flown, it kind of rusted or something, so they now have to fix it. It's like they spent like hundreds of like millions of euros on that, and then they cut the art budget by about 40%.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah, but that's happening everywhere, right? Like
yeah.
we see that in every country in the world. You have a changing political situation where things are shifting more right, not just center right, but alternative, alt right. Government parties becoming more mainstream. There's often little to no public support for support of the arts, unless it's for arts education. And then within the cultural sector, you have people scrambling for the little bits that they get. That's a global issue.
Mm.
And let me just say for the record, the Dancers Council can't do much about that. But I think what you'll find is that companies, the bigger companies, will be shifting their income situation to look for more private sponsoring, corporate sponsoring. The bigger companies are already doing that. The National Ballet and NDT is already very much at the forefront of that in the Netherlands. And in the Netherlands, we're also quite far behind relative to other countries. You know, if you compare it to something like the situation in the UK or the US, you know, they're all about sponsors, donors, trustees, patrons. They have levels and tiers of how you support arts institutions. And I'm not saying that's right. I'm not saying that's right. But we've seen consistently now over the time that I've been in the Netherlands anyway, is this slight shift away from sort of what people used to call old Europe, you know, with heavily state subsidized institutions and big government taking care of the subsidiaries. And that's changing. That is changing. You see it also with our healthcare, right? In the Netherlands, we pay these huge monthly premiums to then pay an eigen risico, right? So, yeah, it is really hard. But there is still a purpose, right? There is still a fixed idea of what we as artists should be doing. And I think for dance, quite often, it's really hard to find that purpose, right? I think there's a way that we are so embroiled in what we're doing, right? We're doers. We're always doing. It's action, it's action, it's action. But it's not always focused or shifted in ways that are useful for the whole sector, right? Everyone's doing. But I think what we have to get better at as a sector is communicating with people outside of our sectors. That's hard, right? But, yeah.
This like shift towards privatization and away from what you called old Europe, do you think that that will have a big effect on the, I don't want to say like quality, but the substance of the work produced in the arts industry? And could it potentially be good if it's sort of more commercialized, maybe more appealing to the public?
I don't think it has to affect the quality of the work, provided that you don't all of a sudden have a Coke advert in the middle of in the pouch between triple bill. I don't think so. I don't think so. I think it makes the work that happens within organizations that are actively engaging with partners more complex. And I think there will need to be sort of protocols in place to ensure that everyone's still able to do the work that they want to do and how they want to do it. But no, I don't see it having any kind of effect on the work.
Because we've seen like in the US, and I'm not sure about the UK, but the ticket prices for shows, for example, in the US can be massive, and this makes it inaccessible to the general public. Do you think it could have a big effect on that?
Again, I don't think so just yet.
Okay.
Corona has, of course, changed everything. And the theater organization, which is separate from the employers organization, they're in just as much trouble as we are, of course. So who knows? I think there's going to be a huge surge in productions post-corona. So hopefully that will be able to alleviate some of the struggles. When it comes to ticket prices, I don't think we'll have the same issues as the US has, because even though it's less common nowadays, going to the theater is still seen as an entertaining night out here, and entertaining in a cultural way, in a social way. And it's not quite being siloed into business, money, and exclusivity, which maybe you might see more in the States when you see those ticket prices, right? I think they're also working on breaking down those barriers too. I think they do see, I mean, there's huge shifts also, again, happening in the US. So who's to say in 10 years that it's not a totally different story? I hope for them will be. But no, I don't think that would be quite possible here.
I mean, I'm not sure what it's like in Ireland, but coming from Australia and then dancing here, I think that's the impressive thing, is that people still go out on a Wednesday night and they pay only 20 euros. I mean, people are always saying that 25, 30 euros is expensive for a ticket, but the way I see it, 30 euros for a ticket for the theater is actually quite reasonable to have a night out. And it's casual, it's not an event.
Yeah, I really like that too. I really enjoy that it's not like this affair that you have to dress up and smile at the people. Yeah, I think it's great that it's more commonplace, and it's a normal experience for people here. That's so refreshing, I think, as an alternative to going to the cinema or sitting at home on your couch. You can go to the theater, and great, everyone's welcome. So yeah, I hope that always stays.
Yeah, like in Ireland, it would arguably be similar to here if we just had more people. Because I don't feel like people really dress up for the theatre. It is a more casual thing. But I guess Ireland just has a more acting theatre scene. That kind of culture is much more commonplace than going to see and support dance. There is some increasing funding and everything, because there's now two funding bodies in Ireland. But I heard recently, because you have the Arts Council in Ireland and you have this thing called Culture Ireland, or
Yeah, Creative Ireland.
Yeah, I heard recently that the reason that that was created, because at first I was like, oh, great, more subsidies or whatever. The Arts Council doesn't have to answer to the government. They're a separate entity so that they can look after art and not be swayed by government policy. Creative Ireland is owned by the government.
Mm.
And the one thing the government is able to do is choose which creative industry is going to get more money. So basically, they've done this to kind of try and force the Arts Council to stay more in tow or like with what they want. So it's like there's always this underhanded thing kind of happening.
Yeah, you see that everywhere, right? Like working within bureaucracies. It's really tough. That's a little bit, where the Dancers Council is sort of we're inserting ourselves in the middle of something that's been going for years. But that's literally having a seat at the table. So I think it's really important to take on those issues and to try and start tackling them and try and start shifting mindsets, right? Because people move on from the work floor and they graduate to managerial, and it's so the gap is huge, right? But from one day being the worker to the next day being the employer, you forget. I think it's a very human thing. I don't think it's malicious at all. It's just you have another goal. So I think as workers, and it's gonna sound like a real communist or whatever, but it's not that. It's about literally having that seat at the table so you can state, for the record, actually, no, we would prefer this. That's all that needs to be said, and it's enough. Um, so when it comes to Ireland, I've been gone so long, I don't really know the situation there, but I know it is supremely difficult because it is a very different scene, and that's hard. That's hard. There's also this sort of dichotomy between sort of traditional Irish culture that's making a comeback. I feel like it's flourishing, and which is beautiful. And then you've maybe the older art scene that maybe I don't know. I could imagine some people see as sort of exported from somewhere else.
Yeah, but this seat at the table thing is like an important point. I feel like not enough dancers kind of try to transition to that place or kind of realize that, it is tunnel vision. It's just like working on my career and then figuring that out and then, okay, transitioning into something else for my career rather than going like, okay, with my knowledge, how can I better protect the people who come up after me or start fighting for those things?
Yeah.
I don't think enough people end up making that transition. So,
And also potentially better the industry as a
yeah,
whole.
you know the way I think any artist doesn't have to be dance. You kind of feel like you're not really fully a part of society as you're like studying and everything like that. That like the rest of the world kind of continues going on in the ladder system. You watch all your friends do the normal thing at the
Yeah.
normal age or societal norm, let's say, and you kind of learn that okay, as an artist, I don't really play or take part in that game. But inside of that thinking, we also screw ourselves out of being able to protect our part of society because we just tell ourselves we are our own society, but we're still dependent on the rest of society to come and experience what we're doing. And also, we want to give back to that. Like, dance is also supposed to be for the masses.
100%. We're in our bubbles, but we're not. We just make it simpler for ourselves by saying, "Oh, I'm part of this, so I'm not part of that bigger thing." It's a survival mechanism, also. It's making things simpler so you can cope, I think. So I have sympathy for that. I get it. I was that also. So the solution is difficult. It is. It's asking people to embrace more complexity. It's asking people to engage. And we're all being asked to engage in so many different ways, right? Social media, life, corona, everything. We're all being asked to engage. So it's really hard. But I suppose I hope to kind of filter the important bits that people really absolutely have to know, and give them that little bite at that one particular moment. And then that's it. That's all you have to do, and then let that sink in and see how that can help support people.
Yeah, you mentioned you kind of like have this information for the people who need it. I'm just curious, how do the people then get this information or know to come to you about it, or are you trying to put it out there?
You can always email me, dancerscouncil@gmail.com. And that's Dancers Council spelled the English way with a CERS, and then council with COU. And you can find this online. This is the CAO translated into English. The Dutch is legally binding, of course, but it's a relatively good translation. And if they ever need to know anything, they can always email me about it. There's some other great resources online that people should check out if they want. There's the Kunstenbond website, which is kunstenbond.nl, .nl, or there's also the Dance Passport, which has some really nice information too about landing in different countries as a freelancer, not just for the Netherlands, but also for Europe. So that might be interesting to check out too. And yeah, like I said, we want to organize a freelance session in January, so we'll be posting about that.
Cool. We've talked about education a lot, and I guess there's this curiosity of like, can this stuff be taught to dancers who are like in tunnel vision mode in training? Do you think it's possible or beneficial to learn about this in your academia?
I mean, it's always beneficial. I think it depends, right? Because these things are changing all the time. They're not set in stone. So let's say the CAO we're in now has another year to go, and then it needs to be renegotiated. Now, there won't be huge changes either. They're all little incremental bits. But I think what would be great for students to know is where they should go when they're out of school to find the information. So de Kunstenbond, the Omscholing Dansers Nederland, Dance Passport, all the organizations that are there and do have information. And of course, Dancers Council hopes to be a part of that too. We're working on a website. We have some social media that I have to figure out how to generate content for. So we're in our baby steps phase, but dancing students have enough to do with rather than learning the ins and outs and reading all those rules that may or may not be in effect when they get to work. So I think it's about knowing what's out there when they get out there.
Yeah, and I mean, it's nice now that sort of, I guess, those things can be done on their behalf by somebody like yourself, now that there is that seat at the table.
Yeah. And I mean, they're welcome to join. Absolutely fantastic for them to join. And it just, once you get into a company and you're a newbie, you're absorbing what everyone else is thinking, right? And saying. That's what I say to people. I say to people, don't be afraid to talk. Like, go ahead and talk. Talk in the dressing rooms, talk backstage, talk about it. And it doesn't have to be always hush hush either. You're well within your rights to say, oh, I hated that we had to work 12 hours that day or whatever. I don't know. To not be afraid to say, oh, that sucks. Because that also means you can feel free to say, oh, this was great. We're really good at saying no, 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 which is important. We can also learn to say, this was really positive. This was great that you guys did it like this, and learn how to communicate. It's literally a tool, it's a muscle too that we don't have as dancers. We're just told like, shut up and dance, and that's all you want to do anyway. So you do it, right? And I think that's more important than learning the rules, where to go and how to speak. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about the situation with the Omscholingsfund. Maybe you can explain for the listeners what it is, and then tell us a little bit about the situation that has been going on in recent times.
Yes. Yeah, the Omscholing Dansers Nederland is a fantastic fund for dancers to enable career transition. They also are great at providing counseling and career advice. So, as well as funding your transition and hopefully the end of your career, they also give career advice and counseling in the early stages, mid stages of your career, which not a lot of people know actually. Um, Everyone working in a dance company pays into the scheme. So the employer will pay a part of that premium and you will pay the other part. And the idea is at the end of your career or after 10 calendar years of paying premiums, let's say, should have enough in your fund to retrain completely in whatever you choose to do. They also have a stipend sort of 5 years in for a certain amount of money. I believe it's €10,000 if you want to study part-time while you're still dancing. So I did that. I did I did a bachelor's in psychology with the Open University over 8 years. It took me 8 years to get the bachelor's, but I did it. So I used that halfway stipend to do that. And I'm actually now retraining also for the full grant too. I was lucky enough to pay enough premiums that I could access the full amount. And it means I also get monthly living stipend, which is really great. So it means I can really focus on doing, well, my studies part-time and Dancers Council and other stuff. So I was very lucky to get that. And that is the goal and the mission of ODN is literally to help dancers through their transition. And it's been of great service to me. And I know it has been to a lot of other colleagues. Transition is rough. And also in particular, if you've been in one place for a long time, which I had. So I done the same thing day in, day out for, the guts of 15 years. So it was of great use to me. Many, many chats were had, many, many sessions to, first of all, get me to the point where I could decide, because I also had this feeling of like, is it now? And everyone sort of speaks about, you want to end your career with a bang, go out in a high note. And I was like, I don't want a bang. I'd love a good fizzle. Could we just like fizzle out and fade to black? Like that would be great. How can we manage that? So all of that stuff, they helped me clarify for myself. So that was just worth so much to me. And unfortunately, they hit a kind of crisis in funding. It's a very complicated bureaucratic mess that I best not go into, primarily because I don't know all the facts and figures, and it's just a nightmare. It's like very heavy Dutch bureaucratic policy stuff. But if I can condense it, and suffice to say, as a result of the Arts Council's funding advice to the Ministry for Culture, there was a kind of gap in policy where it wasn't quite clear who was going to continue to make the payments to the Omscholing Fonds. So the Omscholing Fonds is actually owned by the employers organization and the union. So it doesn't really exist as its own entity. It's born of those two. So that left it a little bit powerless. And in this sort of gap in funding, it became really clear that if we didn't make a noise about it, it would just kind of disappear. There has been in the past also issues with employers not paying their premiums into the fund for their dancers because they didn't see it as important or for whatever other reason. So there was just a hole. There was a gap in funding. With this new round of cultural subsidies here in the Netherlands, the structurally funded companies that get the bigger amounts and structural amounts for 4 years grew. It expanded. So we were 4 companies: National Ballet, NDT, Scapino, and Intradance, and we are now, I believe, 8 or 9. So Guy and Ronnie has joined us. The Stilta has joined. Aya has joined. Mass and Sally. So that meant that potentially there should have been more people paying into the larger pot for the ODN, but those companies were kind of surprised by getting into the biz. So they hadn't added the amount of money that they would need in their funding for the ODN to their budgets. Just messy stuff, you know.
Yeah.
And because of the big cuts to the smaller funded companies, the FPK companies, so that would cover a lot of the freelancers, they are always using all of their budgets on production. So yeah, rock hard place, right? What you gonna do? Freelancers are also able to access the scheme, but it's very difficult because they're their own employer. They have to pay the employee and the employer amount. So it almost makes it impossible to pay in. Now, I know some people do, but it's a big chunk of money. So there's all these structural issues that will have to be resolved in the future, but it meant that there was a lot of tension with this new round when it came to filling that gap. And we felt the only way that we could do that was contacting the minister directly. So we wrote a letter to the minister in June before the holidays, and we asked her to help save the ODN and keep their funding intact to fill that gap, and also oblige all employers of dancers in the Netherlands to have to pay the premiums on behalf of their dancers. And basically, we kind of got an answer literally yesterday again, too, that she will pay a certain amount to fill the gap in the funding that had sort of developed over the years, and that she hoped that the sector would work to make it more sustainable. So, long story, suffice to say, it's good enough for now.
Yeah, no, that sounds like a win.
It sounds like it's going to be a lot of work for you then also to start the communication with the employers to help fix the sector.
Jamie's been great. Jamie has really run with this one.
Yeah.
So that's her neck of the woods. You know, she loves this stuff, and she's really good at it. So she was really at the forefront there. Yeah, it's. I wish it was simpler. I wish it was simpler. Unfortunately, it's not. But I think we have to just try and streamline these things. They're just so complicated. These structures are so complex, and so there's so many moving parts that I find it really difficult to find like the essence of things. And so that's what I see as like my job, like swipe away. What are we doing? You know? But ODN is just, I mean, gosh, we're so lucky. We're so lucky we have something like that in existence. It is really one of a kind. There are other retraining schemes in different countries, but this one is just really great. So make sure your employers are paying their premiums and freelancers, I wish there was a way. I know they're always happy to have the conversations, though. You should definitely make an appointment.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I don't think I'm going to be paying the premium and for myself into it for the next 10 years because it just kind of seems a little bit like I could use that money to pay for the schooling. But it is great that it is there, and I'm really happy that you're able to use it fully now and that you used it already before in part. Do you want to mention something about the course that you're doing now and how is this somehow aiding to your kind of new trajectory or maybe goals?
Yeah. Well, like I said, going back to kind of this idea of transition, you know, I was so reluctant. I had my entire career, I had plan A, I had plan B, I had plan C, D, E. I knew exactly what I was going to do. When I was finished dance, I was ready. Do you know what I mean? And then I got to the point when I was ready and I realized I just had no idea what I wanted to do. Even more than that, I had no idea what I could do. So that took me a long time to figure out. And basically, Corona happened, and I was like, right, this is a sign. Get your act together, Sarah. Now you're stopping dancing for real and just pick something. And this was in May, in May. So that's how late it was. And I was applying for universities when the deadlines for a lot of them had already passed, but there was a few left that their deadline was the 1st of May or the 1st of June, I don't remember. And I know I'd made columns. I'd like, okay, there's this course, there's this course, there's this course. And I was like, okay, well, I guess I'll go for that one. And, I'd done my research. It looked good, but who knows, right? Like, who knows really when you look at those websites and you're like, I think I'll be cool. Anyway, I picked master's at Erasmus called Arts, Culture and Society. It's kind of a mix of cultural sociology and there's a little bit psychology in there, which is more my background. And there's a lot of aesthetics at the moment. All very interesting. I'm so delighted with the course. I love it, love it, love it. I hope to write my thesis on dance or something dance related. So I will definitely be incorporating what I'm doing with the Dancers Council and or other things. I am loving getting a new perspective on the cultural sector, seeing it a little bit from the outside now. Also, dance in relation to museums, in relation to theater, in relation to film. It's really, really wonderful to talk to people that are so engaged with the arts in different ways too. So yes, I absolutely hope to use it for the future. I don't know what that means. You get a lot of people asking you when you're leaving a company or you're stopping dancing, well, what are you going to do? And I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to do. I have no idea what I'm going to do, but I know I like doing this and I like doing that. So, yeah. No, loving the course, really loving it. Yeah.
Great. I'm thrilled to hear that. It is a good time to be doing it. Corona is a good time to be using it to learn something.
Yeah. There's a lot out there, eh? That's also a nice thing to know that there's still a lot to learn. It's not that I knew everything as a dancer or in the dance sector. That's not it at all. But it's just so nice to kind of lift the lid off a bit and let it go and not have to be the best or that's really nice. I really like that.
Yeah, but like to not also have the idea that this is all that I can do in relation to dance, that you can transition forward and you can be pushing for policy or for change or for whatever, support, education, you name it, where your interest goes, you can always continue to develop yourself and your interest with dance and what you do with it. That just because you stop working with a company you've worked with for a long time, it doesn't mean that you're stopping your relationship with this thing that you love.
Yeah, that was really hard though, I have to say. Like I took the opportunity for Corona to be like, and now no dance, no art, no, And I think everyone needs a break. But it is it's just such a beautiful field, isn't it? It's so wonderful. I remember the first thing I missed about working in the studio was like the touch. You don't realize how much as a dancer you're touching people and they're touching you. And this thing, like when you stop dancing, you're like, in the beginning, I wanted to touch people. I was like, you greet someone, you're like, hand on the shoulder, and they're like, what are you touching me for? It's so not normal. So I really, really missed that. And then at one point that like switched and I was like, I don't want to be touched at all anymore. Stop. The proprioception is gone. Leave me alone. And so it's funny. It's funny to feel the changes.
Yeah, I can only imagine the kind of trip, especially like your identity must have been like wrapped up in a company you worked with for 15 years. That's tricky to leave behind, I'm sure.
Oh yeah. The last few years also dancing at the level I was dancing, the amount I was dancing, it was a lot with a family at home too and other responsibilities. Yeah. It's a lot of work. It's a lot
Yeah.
of
And you were still dancing full time when you started your family.
yeah. Yeah.
How was that? Because I can imagine that must have been, yeah, I mean, how do you split your time?
Yeah, no, you don't, do you?
Yeah.
You just don't. We joke, me and my partner, we joke all the time. It's like, yeah, my salary just went straight to daycare. And I mean, I always wanted a family also. I wanted to have kids while I was still working so I could come back to dance. And that was really great. I really loved that. And I it gave me a new perspective on dance. It made me able to focus better on dance, funnily enough, because when you got to the studio, you were alone. You had only had to work on you, right? That's like such a luxury. So I love that. And I loved having my kids in the studio, and the company was really open and friendly about it. It was like welcoming them into the big family of, and then well, I suppose when the second one came along also, my daughter, it was a little trickier because then you're juggling multiple needs then too. So that got a little trickier. And then I kind of knew, okay, we'll be wrapping this up soon, fellas. Um, but it was really hard to make the decision for myself and not because I felt I had to. I really wanted to make it because I really wanted to decide to stop. Sounds so ridiculous now. I wanted to decide to stop because I wanted to stop dancing and not because I felt like other factors were making it too hard or that I was doing it out of sense of responsibility or something, which is absolutely totally over analytical and a bit nuts really. But it was my process and it was my way to figure it out. I knew I didn't want to stop and regret. I wanted to make sure I had it all out. And so that's what I did. Yeah. But it's great having kids and dancing. It is great. If you can manage it, it's also not forever. We always know it's not forever. But it's not for the faint-hearted either.
Yeah, I can only imagine like because I'll never have to experience it as a guy, but like growing a human while continuing to dance,
Yeah.
bringing that human into the world and then getting your body ready for stage again. That's a
Oh,
trip.
yeah. And of course, everyone is different too. Like everyone has different pregnancies, everyone has different labors, everyone has different babies. So it is how it is. And I was just very lucky. And I remember after my first one, I was super motivated to get back. I was like, let's do this. Let's go. So I came back relatively quickly. And then with my second one, I wasn't sure if I'd be able to come back as quickly. So I danced longer. My last show was in Athens in this like massive theater. I think it's called like something ridiculous, like the Megaron. Megaron. And we were doing a Hans van Man ballet. And like, if you know Hans van Man, and it's a unitard, it's a unitard and it's inevitably shiny. So I was in this shiny unitard, like, and I was doing Saul's part, Saul Leon, and she was like, just make some curves, just make sure you show the curves in other ways. So I was like trying to do all these hands on man and walks with posture, but like kind of curved over and with lots of like side angles and stuff like that. Yeah, but those are the things that are just you remember them and they're beautiful memories and it's like, oh, I did that. That's cool.
That's insane.
Yeah. Cool. You've given us a lot. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, blatty blatty blah.
Last thing is, did you remember or come up with a task?
Yes, I did. I was thinking about it and I was like, God, could I add to all the tasks you guys have given already? But I suppose it's not really a task, but I thought it's nice to draw attention to the rib cage, because I think quite often, as sort of the more formally trained dancers, we're so used to just keeping it solid, locked down, abdominals folding in and underneath and diaphragm up, and, posture, yada, yada. But quite often what you see now in more modern works is folding and concave. And I like to introduce that aspect if I'm teaching or whatever, that you can use your rib cage in different ways, and you can fold in and you can use your back space. And so I would just encourage people to see if they can find flexibility in that mid spine range and movement in your rib cage, so that you start working on softness and lightness, and also heaviness too. Right? We can also talk about width, which helped me always. I like to think of this width of the shoulders and the rib cage then too, echoing that. So you can play around with how you use that. And a really good exercise, I always think it's so simple, is to just walk backwards. We very rarely walk backwards, right? But if you walk backwards, how you can lead with your, I call it the back space, but it's literally the ribs at the back of your body, and maybe coming up to just underneath, just above the shoulder blades, and this space is, if you feel like you're falling when you're walking backwards, you can find it. And then you feel it shifting and changing as it scoops down and underneath. I like that feeling. So that's what I was thinking about.
Cool. Thank you for sharing.
Nice, yeah.
Cool. Is there anything else that you would love to impart to the airways, or?
No, just find us on Instagram, Facebook, Dancers Council. If they have any questions, I'll do my best to answer them. Yeah, and keep an eye out for our freelancers Zoom session. I'll be posting about that shortly, and we'd love people to join. We'd love people to just come, and they don't have to say anything if they don't want to. Just join. And you'll be there, Dylan, right?
Yeah.
Fabulous.
No, I'd love to join, even if I don't have so much input to give yet, because.
Perfect. Yeah, what input? I don't know what I'm gonna ask. I don't know what you're gonna ask. It's just a chat. That's all.
Okay, great. Yeah. No, I look forward to it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah. This was great.
Oh, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to my waffle.
Anytime. Thank you so much for tuning into the Dance Rounds podcast. Myself and Hayden are very thankful for everybody tuning in and listening. If you appreciate the podcast and what we're doing, please share it with your friends. If you don't care for it, please share it with your enemies. Either or, please share it. Please follow us on Instagram, Facebook. Get in touch with us if you like what we're doing, or if you have any ideas. If you have people that you think would be interesting for us to talk to, we would be more than happy to hear. Thank you so much for listening. This is myself, Dylan, Hayden, and Sarah signing off.